Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 6th of September, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily by going to weather.gov/Alaska, weather.gov/Fairbanks, weather.gov/Anchorage, or weather.gov/Juneau. As always, your general aviation information is found at weather.gov/AAWU. That's short for the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit, of course. You're going to see some different things on tonight's show. The picture may look a little bit different to you, and that's because the National Weather Service here in Alaska is experimenting with new ways to deliver the Alaska Weather Show to you where you are and in our state. We're actually working on this broadcast tonight from the National Weather Service office in Anchorage. So let us know what you think, and we appreciate your comments, concerns, and questions anytime. The email right there is a great way to let us know. david.snyder@noaa.gov is where we like to receive all those hypes and gripes anytime about anything. You'll also see some different images tonight. We're changing the way we're doing Alaska weather a little bit to help improve the way we're sharing our weather forecast information with you. You'll see different weather trends and perhaps a little bit more information than what you're used to there. So we hope you like it, and if you don't, or if you do, please do let us know. On with the show now. And if you were in Fort Yukon, this is what you saw today. A beautiful day looking northward with a beautiful autumnal picture and the gold colors of fall there in the tundra and the trees. Just a great view from Fort Yukon and the FAA Aviation Weather Camera. Of course, you can check these out anytime you like, simply by going to avcams.faa.gov, and the whole list is there. You'll also find the link on our weather site, weather.gov/AAWU. We know how useful these are to you. Critical, in fact, for many other places, especially if you've been flying in and around any of the weather around South Central or Southeast under this wide area of low pressure today. That zone was working northward, bringing some pretty gusty winds and occasionally heavy rain through South Central last night. In Southeast, it was a little less wind and a little more rain across northern and eastern parts of the Gulf. Good news was, though, that the heaviest rainfall that we saw earlier in the week wasn't part of this most recent weather picture, so maybe only another ½ inch to 1 inch in some locations there. Some of the flooding concerns around the Taya River are still there, but the concerns are going down, so there are no watches, warnings, or advisories for any parts of Southeast. For the eastern Alaska range, wind advisories continue for those regions there through the overnight hours, thanks to gusty conditions there. Some of the strongest winds we saw in the region overnight were in the 40 to 50 mile an hour range there around the Deltana and Tanana Flats region. In western or eastern Anchorage, I should say, some of the wind gusts were in between about the 30, 40, and 50 mile an hour range. There were some stronger gusts in the higher terrain and occasional damage across town, mainly some fences and trees, perhaps a few yard signs blown around. But it didn't seem like anything too substantial, with the exception of a number of electric customers were out of service for a while across the Susitna Valley and across northern parts of Anchorage there. So if you have any other damage to report, we always do appreciate those storm reports, as that helps us do our job better. So the next time we see a large fall storm, we can understand the impacts that it has on your community, no matter what part of Alaska you're in. That dry air that we saw punching its way northward past Fairbanks today provided occasional clear skies there, and that's what we saw in the picture around Fort Yukon. That warm weather will continue driving northward. However, we've seen some areas of low clouds and fog today across the North Slope. Not a whole lot of rain just yet, but that will be changing over the course of the next few days as a trough of low pressure is hovering right across the North Slope and a trough across the south and western parts of Alaska. Low pressure is also sitting across the central and western chain. As that drives eastward, another surge of moisture will be lifted northward into South Central. We'll see a little bit of a break and then a return to some rainfall there. Eventually that, of course, will move its way across southeastern Alaska. So a very unsettled atmosphere all the way around the Horn. In the meantime, here's a look at your surface map. Low pressure sitting across Kotzebue or Norton Sound around 989 millibars. You can see that sitting very close to Unalakleet and just south of Kotzebue. On the south and eastern side of that, we saw some thunder and lightning earlier today around Lake Iliamna. Otherwise, periods of rain for south and west all the way into the upper Kuskokwim and around the western Alaska Range. South Central was looking at rainfall from time to time when the winds weren't blowing. Periods of heavier rainfall around Prince William Sound into the northern and eastern Gulf, and some pockets of light rainfall across the central and southern parts of southeast. Out west, it didn't look like there's a lot of rain with that, but we did notice some wet weather across the eastern chain and into the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula. As we go forward tonight, the frontal boundaries, the zones where we see a sharper range in temperature contrast, will gradually fall apart, but we'll keep the low pressure systems intact, and that means the low will travel a little bit further northward toward Kotzebue at 991 millibars and across the eastern chain at 991 as well. High pressure is trying to gain some ground across the central and eastern Gulf. That's still south of Haida Gwaii and trying to lift drier air northward. It hasn't quite done the trick, and instead it will push some wetter weather toward the capital city and the central and southern chain there. Across the southwest, watch for periods of light rainfall and drizzle. It looks like you'll see generally less substantial wet weather and maybe even a chance at some drier weather out across the western parts of the YK Delta and the Seward Peninsula. There might be a hint of sunshine, but there's also a decent risk of seeing some fog as we get into Thursday morning. By the afternoon, we'll expect rainfall to focus on the northern and eastern Gulf, some drier weather perhaps sneaking into the Dixon entrance across the central and southern parts of southeast, more showery weather, if not drier weather for you. High pressure across the western chain at 1,023 millibars pushes eastward just a little bit more, and periods of rain and drizzle will continue across the north slope. Notice that boundary with the much colder air still lurks northward, but it isn't pushing much closer toward the coast. So any mixed precipitation we see in the morning for the higher terrain probably won't be there in the afternoon. Showers will continue for places like McGrath and the Yukon Delta, but Cape Newenham into Bristol Bay may start to see some drier weather going into Friday. You'll still see showers in the region, but it looks like the steadier rainfall, fog, and drizzle will linger across the north slope. There is a sign of some colder weather dropping southward toward the central interior, but you may not have that quite yet on Friday. Colder weather dropping across the eastern parts of Russia toward the Gulf of Anadyr, and all of the Gulf, of course, still looking at showery weather as we get into your Friday and probably Saturday as well, with the northern and eastern Gulf being the wettest places and continued showers and low clouds all the way back into south central. But the further north you go from Anchorage, drier weather should be found heading into the interior, just as high pressure continues creeping eastward across the western Bering Sea at 1,029 millibars there, and fog, of course, will still be an issue. Now going forward, we're looking at highs and low temperatures for the next 2 days, not just one now. So we'll do low temperatures tonight, high temperatures tomorrow, lows tomorrow morning, and then high temperatures the following day. So you're going to get 4 sets of images here. Here we go. Thursday morning, southeast, you're looking at lows in the lower to mid 50s with south central in the mid to upper 40s. Kodiak Island near 46. The middle Tanana Valley, areas around Fairbanks closer to 40 degrees with mid 30s for the north slope. Notice you're above freezing there. Nome around 41, southwest in the YK Delta, back in the mid 40s, and closer to 50 degrees around Sandpoint and 45 around St. Paul and St. George. Highs there Thursday afternoon in the lower 50s with southeast in the lower 60s for many locations there. South Central and Prince William Sound in the mid to upper 50s. Kodiak 54, Anchorage closer to the mid to upper 50s, and Talkeetna 56. With Fairbanks, one of the warmer spots in the state for your Thursday, back in the lower 60s. Eagle and Northway in the lower 60s, with Arctic Village back at around 50 degrees, Anaktuvik Pass 46, and places on the north slope back in the lower to mid 40s, Barrow at 42. You'll drop to 35 there for Friday morning. Nome's looking at 39, Bethel in the lower 40s, Fairbanks for Friday morning in the lower 40s as well, mid to upper 40s for most of south central, southeast in the low to mid 50s, with the Alaska Peninsula closer to 50 degrees, St. Paul looking at 46 and Bethel 43. For your Friday afternoon, we'll finish the week strong with highs back in the lower 60s around Fairbanks, out toward Eagle a little bit cooler, upper 30s and lower 40s for the north slope. You're holding on to that mild weather thanks to that southerly flow. Nome looking at 50 degrees, Unalakleet 51, Ambler and Bettles also in the lower 50s. Southeast, temps in the upper 50s to low 60s, even for Sitka, Haines, and Skagway. For South Central, expect high temperatures back in the mid to upper 50s. Not too bad around Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, expect a high of 54. Bristol Bay temperatures will hang on to the milder weather for just a little bit longer around Dillingham, 56 degrees, and it looks like 59 degrees around King Salmon. As you look out toward the central and eastern chain, look for mild weather to continue.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather will be improving across many areas of the central and eastern interior tomorrow, especially in regards to turbulence. Let's take a look at your flying weather for Thursday morning. Notice IFR across some of the higher terrain of southeast. MVFR conditions across the central and eastern Gulf will be broken up a little bit and improving conditions along Cook Inlet. Look for MVFR to start the day across southwestern Alaska and a large part of Kotzebue Sound and the Seward Peninsula, with IFR along an old frontal boundary across the north and across parts of the Aleutian chain. As we get into the afternoon, a lot of that will shift eastward. MVFR starts to improve a little bit across some of the central and western interior, but notice how it fills in across the Gulf. IFR continues just east of Juneau, and IFR also expected around Kodiak Island out toward Cape Sarachev and down toward parts of the Alaska Peninsula. As you look at the south slopes of the Brooks Range out toward the interior of the Seward Peninsula, look for IFR there, as well as the northern coast, as well as MVFR expected to fill in across the coastal plain tomorrow. Here's a look at Friday now. We're going to continue showing some additional periods here to help you understand the trend as we go forward in our new version of Alaska weather. IFR conditions will fill in a little bit more on Friday morning for the central and northern sections of the Panhandle, as well as the northern Gulf into Prince William Sound and all the way out toward Kodiak Island. Some improvement around Bristol Bay and just offshore of the Yukon Delta, with IFR conditions across the north coast and north of the Brooks Range out toward Ambler. As we get into Friday afternoon, MVFR should be fairly widespread across the western interior, southwest Alaska, and the north, with IFR conditions expected to continue across the central and northern parts of the Panhandle, as well as just outside of Resurrection Bay, very close to Kodiak Island, and then just west of Nikolsky, with MVFR widespread across the Bering Sea. Moving on to your past conditions and Aktivik for your Thursday, MVFR conditions are expected to move toward IFR as we go throughout the day. Adigan Pass looking for IFR by the end of your Thursday. For Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, expecting to see marginal conditions through most of Thursday. Rainy Pass, marginal conditions through Thursday as well. For Windy Pass tomorrow, look for MVFR through most of the day. Isabel Pass, we're expecting to see marginal conditions, visibility and ceiling included in that, with VFR conditions by the end of the day in Mentasta Pass. For Tanita Pass, watch for MVFR through most of your Thursday. Portage Pass, also marginal conditions most of the day, especially on the east side, improving conditions again on the west. And Chilkoot and White Pass, we're expecting to see MVFR through most of the day. Freezing levels, no surprise that with the recent conditions moving through from south to north, we've got a lot of warm air hovering across the Alcan border and over southeast. Levels there as high as 6 to 8, even 10,000 feet as you get out toward the Dixon entrance. Out across southwest, a little bit more cool air pooling up across the central and eastern sections of the southern Bering Sea, with some warmer air trying to push in from the west. Levels as low as 2 to 4,000 feet from Barrow out toward Wainwright as you start your daytime tomorrow. Here's a look at icing, and we've changed the colors here a little bit more to correlate and match up with what you'll find online from the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit. So yellow is now our lowest color. That means isolated moderate icing potential across the North Slope and parts of the YK Delta and into the Kuskokwim Valley. Some of that could reach considerable moderate as well, and above 10,000 feet for levels there across the northern and western Gulf. Here's a look at the jet stream now, and a broad trough of low pressure sits across all of Alaska. The fastest moving winds moving out of here across the North Pacific. When the two jet streams combine, that's when the wind speeds really pick up. This convergence, as we call it, moves that wind along a little bit faster, but then diverges once again with more of a southerly stream breaking off across southeastern Alaska. That's where all of the heat's coming from across western North America. But our unsettled weather across most of Alaska right now is due to that very broad trough up above around 30,000 feet. Below that at 9,000 feet, you see our broad southerly flow continues across the region, especially the eastern Gulf. That's keeping very wet conditions for southeast and keeping wind flowing over the Alaska Range and the Chugach. That should be improving as we head into tomorrow. Meanwhile, northerlies coming down the west coast here, anywhere from 10 to about 20 knots. Some of the stronger winds just west of St. Matthew at 3,000 feet. A broad southerly flow continues at this level. Wind speeds a little bit higher out across the eastern Gulf, anywhere from 10 to as strong as 40 knots. Light winds across the eastern interior. Wind speeds slowing down a little bit more across the Alaska Range, and we get into our northerlies descending across the west coast there and into the central and eastern chain, with high pressure building in to the western Bering Sea. On to turbulence now, and again the colors should match the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit online. You'll notice across the upper Kuskokwim and across the central Yukon Valley below 8,000 feet, there's still an opportunity for some considerable moderate turbulence throughout today, and choppy conditions across the west coast, the central and eastern chain, and out across the northern Gulf. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with the rest of your marine weather.
NOAA's national marine sanctuaries protect areas of national significance for their exceptional natural beauty and resources. Research and monitoring expeditions provide scientists with valuable knowledge about the biodiversity and ecological integrity of these fragile underwater systems. The knowledge does not come easy. Their mission is challenging and sometimes dangerous, but these risks pale in comparison to the wealth of information that awaits them. This is Expedition Sanctuary Quest. Preparing a research vessel to go to sea is a huge undertaking. Over the course of one day, the empty ship transforms into a high-tech research platform. Tons of equipment, provisions, and supplies have to be loaded and stowed. The crew must double-check every last detail. Once at sea, the ship must be entirely self-sufficient. To keep everything running smoothly, the crew charts a cruise plan to coincide with the schedule of research. The goal of this expedition is to assess the health of offshore and nearshore marine ecosystems. The NOAA ship MacArthur will spend 2 months at sea, focusing on all the national marine sanctuaries along the West Coast, from Southern California to Northern Washington. Research takes place around the clock, and as night closes over the sanctuary, a team of special map makers deploy their side-scan sonar. The sonar will provide acoustic information to make detailed maps of the ocean floor. As one set of scientists are finishing up the night shift, another is being called to start their day. Wake-up calls come early, usually before the sun is up. By dawn, Chief Scientist Sarah Fangman is on the bridge, checking the plans for the deployment of the remotely operated vehicle.
Our weather has turned a little bit, and so we're going to have to move to a more protected area where we can work. Well, as long as we're heading in this direction, because the weather is forcing us that way, we'd like to stop.
Once calmer waters are found, the science continues. The remotely operated vehicle crew prepares their machine for its dive. The ROV allows the scientists to penetrate the unexplored depths, which account for 90% of the ocean. There is no idle time. While the ROV is being prepared, another group of scientists takes seawater and surface plankton samples. As the samples are collected, they go straight to the onboard lab, where they are processed and analyzed.
The ROV can stay down many hours, whereas divers are limited with supplied air, and we can rotate shifts and go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
The cameras on the ROV are the scientists' eyes into the ocean. These cameras will confirm what the scientists have found through the side-scan sonar mapping. The ROV also allows scientists the opportunity to do species counts and more detailed habitat classification.
Look at the anemones and the corals, cup corals.
Oh yeah.
That is
excellent.
gorgeous.
Excellent. Habitat's changed dramatically.
Yeah.
Oh,
did you
nice
see? It just
one.
caught
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Oh yeah.
A research ship can be a dangerous place with hazards all around. Everyone must be alert to these and know how to deal with emergencies. Fire and evacuation drills are performed without warning at any time of the day or night. As the science work goes on, the ship's crew also works around the clock. Engineers keep the engines operating properly, while the deck officers constantly monitor the ship's location. The deck crew operates all the machinery needed to perform the research, and the galley crew has to be sure all 40 people on board get fed. As night falls again, another shift of scientists begin their work in trawling for plankton.
Half moon out there, so there's quite a bit of light, which will affect how fast and how high these critters come up in the water column.
Okay, watch the slack there, folks.
Okay, got her. Let her go.
One more step in measuring productivity of an area.
Juvenile deposits, krill, squid, copepods.
After a long, wet night, dawn finally comes. The ship begins a transit to the next area for work. As miles of ocean slide beneath the hull, the observations and data collecting continue. Seabird and marine mammal observers are out working. Bird and whale counts help determine the health of a given area. For 2 months, this grueling schedule of day and night scientific work continues, searching for the understanding that will provide solutions to better manage resources within our national marine sanctuaries.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time now for a quick check of the sea ice edge, and no major ice pack anywhere close to the navigational waters across northern Alaska. That's good news. Of course, we are approaching the sea ice minimum, and you can check the very latest outlook for the season to come at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. The areas of ice that we see on the map are well north of the coast, so no concerns there in navigational waters tonight. Moving on to the marine forecast now for southeast, you'll see some of the strongest winds across the Lynn Canal. Those southerlies are going strong, around 25 knots or so up there with 5-foot seas. A little bit further down the inside passages, you're looking at 15-knot winds with 3-foot seas. A little bit more of a northwesterly flow inside of Clarence Strait. Across the outer coast, a slight breeze coming into Craig and Metlakatla, a southwesterly flow there with 15 knots and 6-foot seas. And we'll see similar conditions up the coast with a little bit more of a southerly push, and stronger southeasterly winds are still feeding into Prince William Sound. You'll see those strengthen even more as we get into more of an easterly flow as we head into Friday. Southerlies continue across the outer coast and strengthen as that disturbance is closing in on the coastline for Friday. A south and easterly flow across the central and southern inside passages, 20 to 30 knots with 4 to 6-foot seas. And the winds in the Lynn Canal die off just a bit, 20 knots there with 4-foot seas on Friday. For South Central, the strongest winds will be inside of Prince William Sound and just outside, 20 to 25 with 4 to 6-foot seas there. Otherwise, light winds across Cook Inlet and around the Barren Islands with a south and easterly flow over the Barrens and 4 to 5-foot seas there for Thursday. By Friday, a little bit more of a north and westerly flow coming into the Gulf. Easterly winds subside just a bit across the northern Gulf and inside Prince William Sound. Expect a northerly flow at 15 knots with a 2-foot sea. Northerlies across most of Cook Inlet as well with 10 to 15 knots there and 3 to 4-foot seas for your Friday. Across the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island now, 15 knots with more of a southeasterly flow coming into the island from the Gulf, 5-foot seas expected. A little bit further down the peninsula, look for a north and easterly flow in the Bering Sea, 15 to 20. Inside Bristol Bay, look for 3-foot seas on the Pacific coast, 6 to 8 for your Thursday afternoon. For Friday, westerlies inside of Shelikof Strait, a 4-foot sea there on a 15-knot wind. Northwesterlies all the way down the Pacific coast, 15 to 20 with 6 to 7-foot seas at their highest throughout the day. And through the Bering Sea, we're expecting 15 to 20 knot winds and 3 to 6-foot seas for your Friday. Looking a little bit further out toward the Aleutians, expect a northerly flow for the Bering Sea coast, 20 knots in most areas with the exception from Kiska to Shemya, a 7-foot sea out there with northerlies on the Pacific coast looking for 10 to 11-foot seas on a 20 to 25 knot wind. For Friday, not a whole lot of a change, a little bit more of a northwesterly shift, but wind speeds stay about the same, 20 knots in all areas, and you're looking at 6-foot seas all the way out toward Kiska, 4-foot seas a little bit further west from there, 5 to 6-foot seas across the Pacific coast on a 20-knot wind from the north and west. Up the west coast we go and into Norton Sound, northwesterlies 15 knots with 3-foot seas. Look for that northwesterly flow to come down the western capes. A little breezy at times, but seas still holding on to about 4 to 6 foot levels there through most of the day. Around the Pribilofs, the northwesterly flow is expected for Thursday with a 6-foot sea on that 20-knot wind. As we get into Friday, St. Matthew Island waters, you're looking at diminishing winds down to 15 knots with a 5-foot sea. Northerlies coming over St. Lawrence Island with a 6-foot sea in the region. Northwesterlies on either side of Nunivak Island, 20 knots with 5-foot seas in the area. And the winds around St. Paul and St. George should go westerly, 20 knots, 5-foot seas expected by the afternoon. Up north, this is where we're going to see some of the more gusty conditions and certainly colder weather, and areas of fog and drizzle should be expected throughout the period. For Thursday, an easterly flow, 30 knots with 8-foot seas in the region, 6-foot seas as you round the Horn from Point Lay to Cape Lisburn, 5 to 6-foot seas there, and outside of Kotzebue Sound, 4-foot seas with a 25-knot wind from the north. By Friday, the winds hold 25 knots around Kotzebue Sound, 5-foot seas expected there. The good news is north and easterly winds diminish just a little bit across the Beaufort Seacoast into Point Barrow. Still looking at 8-foot seas and winds coming in from the north and east, but the winds will subside just a little bit as we wrap up the week. That's a look at your marine forecast. Let's recap the weather around Alaska. Gusty winds will continue around the Alaska Range as we head through tonight and into early tomorrow morning. A wind advisory is posted for the eastern Alaska Range as we finish out the night. For southeastern Alaska, you're still dealing with clouds and some periods of heavier rainfall. Most of that will be across northern parts of southeast as we go through the evening and overnight hours. Some of that will gradually subside as this disturbance presses a little bit further eastward. Out west, another wave of low pressures working across the eastern chain. That's down to 991 millibars. It's not a terribly strong storm, but it will continue that fetch of warm and wet air into south central, Kodiak Island, and parts of southwestern Alaska. The trend for that will continue into Friday. You'll notice some breaks in the clouds around Cook Inlet, but the western Alaska Range should continue to see showers as well as Prince William Sound, the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula, and of course our friends in southeast will still be getting wet. The warm air pushes northward, but by Friday, an initial wave of cooler air starts to make its way southward, and we'll see some colder weather moving into central Alaska by the weekend. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.